There is a red shield hanging above a doorway in Frankfurt, Germany in the year 1744. It is a small sign, painted iron, weathered at the edges, fixed to the front of a narrow house on a street so overcrowded it barely qualifies as a street. The Judengasse, or Jews' Alley, is a lane sealed at both ends by gates that are locked each night and on Christian holidays. The people who live here are not permitted to own land outside this corridor. They are not permitted to hire Christian servants, and they cannot walk freely through most of the city around them. The gates determine when they sleep and when they wake, and above one of the doors in this sealed corridor, a red shield hangs. The man who lives under that shield is named Mayer Amschel Bauer. He is a money changer. He lends coins and currency at interest, tracks debt, manages exchange rates between the currencies of a dozen different German states, and keeps meticulous records in a ledger that almost no one outside this alley will ever see. When Moses dies, his son inherits the trade. His son's name is Mayer Amschel Bauer. Mayer is born in the same year as that shield, 1744. He grows up beneath it, learning to read prices before he learns to read books. He memorizes the value of coins the way other children memorized prayers. He apprentices with a banking house in Hanover called Oppenheimer, and when he returns to Frankfurt, he is no longer simply the son of a money changer. He is a man who understands how money moves between powerful people, and more importantly, he understands that the men who move it are far more powerful than the men who spend it. At some point in his adult life, Mayer Amschel Bauer makes a decision. He stops using the name Bauer and begins calling his family Rothschild. The word comes directly from what hung above his father's door, Rothschild or Red Shield. The German words fold into a single surname. The shield becomes the name becomes a dynasty, and the dynasty becomes something that has no clean word for it, not a family, not a bank, not a government, but a structure that touches all three simultaneously across generations. Most people who know the name Rothschild know roughly this version of the story: a clever man in a Frankfurt ghetto who turned a red sign into an empire. It is the story the family itself has told through official biographies, but because it is largely true in its surface facts, it tends to end the inquiry before the harder questions begin. Where did the Bauer family come from before Frankfurt? Why did a family of modest money changers possess knowledge of pan-European financial networks that should have been entirely outside their social reach? What was the origin of the financial methodology that Mayer Amschel would later deploy with such precision? The simultaneous multi-city lending model, the use of family members as nodes in a distributed network, the practice of financing multiple sides of a conflict to guarantee returns regardless of outcome. These are not the practices of a man who invented them from scratch in a locked alley in Frankfurt. These are the practices of a tradition. The question is, what tradition? To answer that, you have to go east, very far east, and you have to go back much further than 1744. There is a civilization that does not appear in the standard Western history curriculum. Its name appears on maps drawn by cartographers across Europe from the 14th through the 18th, and then, in a span of decades, the name begins to vanish. The civilization is called Tartaria, and the territory it describes, at its maximum extent, covers most of the Eurasian landmass. When European cartographers in the 1500s drew the world, they labeled the vast interior of Asia with the word Tartaria. This was not a vague placeholder. The maps that feature Tartaria are detailed. They show rivers, cities, administrative divisions, and trade roads. The 1570 atlas of Abraham Ortelius, one of the most respected cartographers of the early modern period, contains a dedicated map of Tartaria, showing it divided into distinct regions. By the mid-19th century, Tartaria as a geographic label begins to disappear from European cartography, divided up and absorbed into the expanding borders of Russia and China. In academic circles, the surviving references are explained away as a loose European term for the Mongol and Turkic peoples of the steppe, a catch-all designation with no coherent political meaning. But there is a problem with that explanation. The people who drew those maps were not careless men. They produced their maps using information from merchants, travelers, diplomats, and intelligence networks. The revisionist position, which sits well outside mainstream academic history, suggests that Tartaria was not simply a geographic label, but a functioning civilization with an administrative structure, a trade network, and an economic system that predated the rise of Western European nation-states. The Silk Road, which connected China, Persia, and the Indian subcontinent to the Mediterranean world, ran through Tartarian territory. The financial infrastructure that kept that road operational, the letters of credit, the currency exchange systems, the trusted merchant networks, was not a spontaneous creation, it was an inheritance. The Mongol Empire, at its peak in the 13th century, was the largest contiguous land empire in human history. One of its most consequential administrative decisions was the establishment of the yam, a pan-continental postal and financial relay system. Merchants operating under Mongol protection could move goods and financial instruments across 8,000 miles of territory under a single legal framework. When the Mongol Empire fractured in the 14th century, those networks did not simply evaporate, they contracted, adapted, and moved westward along existing trade corridors. Among them were Ashkenazi Jewish merchant families who had functioned as financial intermediaries across the steppe for generations, permitted to conduct financial operations that were restricted for Muslim and Christian merchants under their respective religious laws. The Bauer family of Frankfurt does not appear in comprehensive genealogical records before the 17th century. By the time Mayer Amschel Bauer is practicing as a money changer, he is operating within a tradition of financial practice that has deep roots in these Eastern commercial networks. The word Bauer in German means farmer or peasant. It is a surname that carries no distinguishing information, functioning almost as a blank veil that disappears into the population. When Mayer Amschel Rothschild renamed the family, he selected from the available symbolic material the red shield that already had meaning within the family's commercial identity and used it to create a new public brand. Alternative researchers have pointed to the red shield as a symbol with pre-Ashkenazi origins, connected to older Eastern mystery traditions and merchant guilds that operated along the Silk Road. The hexagram itself appears in the religious art of multiple Eastern traditions, used as a protective or identifying symbol for traveling merchant families long before its modern associations. While the documentary record is thin, financial networks operating across political and religious boundaries in the pre-modern period had structural incentives to maintain opacity. Discretion was a survival mechanism. When Mayer Amschel Rothschild dispatched his 5 sons to 5 European cities, Nathan to London, Jakob to Paris, Solomon to Vienna, Amschel to Frankfurt, and Karl to Naples, he was deploying a multinodal network model that required a prior sophisticated understanding of distributed financial operations. The family maintained a private intelligence and communication network faster and more reliable than the official communications of European nation-states, famously allowing Nathan Rothschild to learn of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo before the British government did. Furthermore, the formula of financing conflicts, lending to governments at war, and maintaining relations with all sides to ensure the winning side is always in debt matches the exact structural logic used by the great merchant banking houses of the Eastern trade networks to manage relations between competing Mongol successor states. Mayer Amschel Bauer was born in 1744 in a locked street in Frankfurt, and he died in 1912, having laid the foundation for a financial network that would shape the modern world. When he renamed his family Rothschild, he gave them a public name rooted in a local symbol. What he could not give them in a name was the thing that actually made them who they were: the inherited knowledge, the practiced methodology, and the network relationships stretching back through the generations, back to the civilization that European cartographers spent 3 centuries mapping under the name of Tartaria. The origin runs deeper than any name, older than any shield, and further east than the borders of any standard map.